All right, great. Thank you, Danielle. We'll give it a couple minutes, let people trickle in. Welcome to everybody coming in. We're going to give it a couple minutes as people keep coming in, then we'll go ahead and get started. For the webinar, I think we have both the chat and the questions that are open right now for attendees. So we'll be monitoring that periodically throughout the presentation. All right, we'll get started in about 1 minute. I have 4 o'clock right now. We'll allow 1 more minute for people to come in. There's still a couple people I've seen come in just in the past 30 seconds or so, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All righty, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I have 4:01 right now. Thanks everyone for joining us today. This webinar is made possible from a collaborative grant through the South Carolina Department of Education, Office of Special Education Services, and the University of South Carolina Southeastern School Behavioral Health Community. I'm Sam McQuillin. I'm faculty in the Department of Psychology at the University of South Carolina. And today we're going to be talking about motivational interviewing. We originally titled the presentation Introduction to Motivational Interviewing, Helping Young People Change. But I also have a subtitle for it that I like to advertise as Starting Motivational Interviewing. So hopefully this will be a good starting point if you've not learned much about motivational interviewing or have been interested in it before but haven't had a chance to learn about it. Just a couple housekeeping items is we have the chat box open that should be for attendees, and I believe it should be for all attendees. Someone can fact check me on that. And then we also have the question and answer box open. We have few enough attendees today that I'm happy to take questions as we go. And if I can't get to it, then we'll try and answer them at the end when we're going through. If there are audio problems or video problems during the presentation, feel free to write them in the chat box. We'll try and get them solved as fast as we can. Other than that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So the first question that I wanted to kind of pose while we're in this is why would we want to learn about motivational interviewing as an approach to having conversations with young people about behavior change? Well, what we know, if we've worked with young people before, or if we've read any of the research in helping young people change behaviors, things like risky behaviors or academic behaviors or behaviors related to mental health, is change is difficult We know it's difficult as providers because we've seen it be difficult before. We've experienced the challenges of helping young people change. And if you've read the research, you also know that a lot of the research indicates that helping young people change often are effects of many of our evidence-based interventions, or effects that we see in the margins of helping them. So change is difficult, and motivational interviewing is an approach to helping people change that has pretty strong empirical support in both young people and adults. So another question I wanted to pose, and we're going to work through this with some of these writing reflex activities. We have a poll in just a few slides that I'd like to get some feedback from you guys is, why is helping so hard sometimes? And rather than focusing on why do young people have a hard time changing, I want to focus on us for a minute. Why does it feel so hard to help young people as they're thinking about behavior change or making changes in their life or interactions with others? And Bill Miller and some others that have written about and developed motivational interviewing have this term called the writing reflex. The writing reflex is this reflexive tendency to want to fix problems for people, to provide solutions for things that they have going on. And as helpers, we want to help young people. That's why we got into this work in the first place. And I think this is a suspicion that I have. I think this writing reflex is actually particularly strong in people who identify as helpers, counselors, psychologists, teachers, mentors, and so on. So what do I mean by this writing reflex? The writing reflex is where we take a shot at trying to attempt or to correct a problem on behalf of someone else. So this is where we try and fix their problem by correcting them, trying to right the wrong that they think. So here's what I call the writing reflex toolkit. We're going to go through a bunch of these, but just to start, advice giving is one attempt at the writing reflex. This is trying to persuade someone that they're heading in the wrong direction by giving them advice on what they should be doing. Another one is warnings or war stories. These are attempts to persuade people by hoping to translate some threat to them, that something could go wrong if you don't change, or if you keep going down the road that you're on, things might not end up well for them. One that I'm susceptible to is expert opinion, talking about the latest research or statistics, or trying to persuade people with facts and so on. This is what we try and do around the Thanksgiving dinner table when we're with others. Persuasion as well. Here are some other examples of these. Ordering, directing, or commanding. This could be, just saying something like, you just got to stop. You can't keep doing this. You have to change. Warning, cautioning, or threatening. Things are going to go wrong if you don't make any behavior change. Making suggestions, providing solutions. So these are kind of the more subtle attempts at, writing other people's problems. So this is like, if someone's trying to lose weight in your house and you ask them if they've tried calorie counting, that's an example of giving a suggestion. No one wants to hear that, by the way. Another one is persuading with logic, arguing or lecturing. Some of us like arguing. It just feels good. It's like automatically reinforcing, or we like, pontificating and trying to persuade people. Moralizing is an appeal to morality. In a mentoring program that I direct, we always tell our mentors, don't should on your mentees, which means telling them what they should be doing or should not be doing, and so on. Shaming, ridiculing, labeling, distracting, humoring, or changing the subject. This is where you don't actually try and help somebody change, but when conversations about change come up, you would rather just distract yourself and them from this, change conversation. So you make a joke or change the subject. So I wanted to share with you what my writing reflexes are, and then I wanted to hear from you what your writing reflexes are as well. And we should have a poll that we can try and communicate some of that to each other. My big writing reflexes, the ones that I fall trapped to almost every time when given an opportunity, when I'm not being thoughtful about how I approach conversations, are warnings and advice giving. So on each of these writing reflexes that we have, and I'll go back through some of these, we have some assumptions that we're making when we attempt to help people change by using these. So for example, my assumptions with warnings are if only people were scared enough, then they would change. If we could just, light the fire, get them a little bit frightened, then they would realize, oh, I should stop, using substances. I could get in big trouble or hurt myself. Or mine with advice giving or expert opinion is, if people only knew what I knew, then they would change. And that really doesn't work. You can ask my wife, right? That is not an effective way to help people change. So some examples of this, just from recent conversations that I've had, is my son's name is Walker. And I remember just the other day, he was riding his bike too fast. And I said, Walker, you need to be careful. I knew a kid once who rode his bike that fast, and he fell down and had to get stitches at the doctor. And guess what my son did? He went just as fast down the hill the next time. Another conversation with my expert opinion, or trying to give advice to people, was somebody was talking about essential oils. They just bought a bunch of essential oils to help them with their focus and hyperactivity. And my writing reflex from the expert opinion was, essential oils don't reduce hyperactivity. You're wasting your money. And that was not very effective either. I'm pretty sure they're still purchasing. So I want to do a quick poll. I think Danielle's going to do the poll. I'm curious at the attendees what their writing reflexes are. So I'll narrate these as we go through them. Is one example of writing reflex we talk about are war stories or warnings. So this isn't the assumption around this is an appeal to threat. Something bad could happen to you. Don't do this. Advice giving is an appeal to your own wisdom or expert opinion. We think we've got it all figured out. Ordering or directing is an appeal to authority. I've noticed this in a lot of mentors when they're working with young people. Will come in, and there's this sense that because they're older, they can tell these young people what they should be doing. Moralizing or shoulding. So or shaming. This is an appeal to morality. Distracting, humoring. This is kind of like throwing your hands up and saying, hey, you know what? I don't need to have this conversation. Or there could be other things that are kind of your go-to writing reflexes, and we're curious about hearing those. So feel free, if you're able, to write in the chat box as well. And we'll take 10 seconds to fill this out. And I'm not sure, Danielle, if we can show the results to the crowd or not, but I'd be curious. Or
I think we should be able to. Okay. I'll let you know when we end the polling.
Cool. All righty. Did we get enough in the poll to share the results? All right.
Everybody gets to see it.
We got a bunch of experts in here. So I don't know if everyone can see it, but we got some of the war stories people were reporting. About 57% of us are saying advice giving, expert opinion, or appeal to wisdom. So we got some kindred spirits in the crowd today. Distracting, humoring, or avoiding difficult conversations. And I think other people might write in the chat box as they go. So some of you might be wondering, as we're going this, is what's the problem with doing this stuff when, things are wrong? If I see a kid doing something, I'm going to tell them a war story, make them, think twice about it. The problem with this is that people, and especially young people, resist persuasion when they're not sure if they want to change. We use this word ambivalence to describe these mixed feelings or contradictory ideas about whether or not they want to make a change in their behavior. This could be whether or not they think behavior change is possible. It could be that they're not sure if they want to do it yet, or if they'd miss things that, they'd leave behind from changing behavior. Some examples of ambivalence are, perhaps a kid that really hates being on probation and all that goes along with that, but also really likes to smoke and hang out with his friends and gets in trouble a lot. So he's having trouble figuring out, like, how do I, keep doing the things that I like without these consequences that I have, or do I need to quit doing these things that I don't have these consequences, and so on. Probably some other things, like you think about a kid that's, thinks that math is boring and is really kind of given up on his math teacher, but one day would really like to be a physician or an engineer or something. Or someone that, maybe has some problem drinking going on, and they are starting to recognize that their drinking might be a problem, but they also really like hanging out with the guys. These are all examples of ambivalence. We have ambivalence of our own. You can probably think of ambivalence that you've experienced this morning about whether or not to go to the gym or what to eat for lunch and so on. So this is where motivational interviewing comes in. So motivational interviewing is defined in the Motivational Interviewing 2013 text, is a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication with particular attention to the language of change. It's designed to strengthen personal motivation for commitment and to a specific goal by eliciting and exploring the person's own reasons for change within an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. A couple key words I want to highlight in this definition that will hopefully introduce later so that you have a sense of the flavor of motivational interviewing by the end of this presentation. Is one, motivational interviewing is goal-oriented. So unlike perhaps traditional Rogerian client-centered therapy that some of you may be familiar with, which was what we'd call client-centered and non-directional, motivational interviewing is client-centered, but it is goal-directed. It's goal-oriented, I should say. Another couple things is that it's really around the framework and what they call the spirit of motivational interviewing is an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion, which is very similar actually to that Rogerian client-centered approach of unconditional positive regard. So with that, I want to now go through what motivational interviewing is not. And this is perhaps maybe one of the most important aspects of this presentation. One, motivational interviewing is not a way of tricking people to change. So it's not a sales tactic or a bait and switch approach to using conversations. It's not necessarily a technique that you pull out when other things aren't working or that you try for one day and then give up on the next day. Another common confusion is that it's not a cognitive behavioral therapy, even though sometimes it's been described as that. As stated before, it's not just client-centered counseling. It's not easy. This is an introduction or a start to learning about motivational interviewing, but we'll talk later in the presentation. It is not easy to learn. And I can tell you from personal experience, I probably had more trouble than most learning motivational interviewing to really get a handle on my writing reflexes. But it requires practice and feedback. One of the recommendations I'm going to give later in the presentation is that if you're interested in learning and improving your skill in motivational interviewing, find a practice partner that you can role play some of these conversations with. Another important thing is the literature shows that motivational interviewing is not a cure-all, and it doesn't work for some people and for some types of behavior. Another common misperception is that it is based, the theory is based on the humanistic or Rogerian theories, but motivational interviewing is actually not based on a theory. It's what they call grounded theory. And how it was developed by Bill Miller and others is simply identifying the verbal behavior in conversations that often lead to client change. So it's a very empirical approach to how they develop this. It's really what works in conversations. And the theory has come after the fact. So I wanted to do a little intro to the spirit and style within the state of the science of motivational interviewing. So this is, hey, what does the research say, and how does this relate to the kind of acceptance and compassion and some of the more or the less objective aspects of motivational interviewing? What we know from the best available research evidence is that motivational interviewing works for two reasons. One is a relational component, and the second is a technical component. The relational component is characterized by this unconditional positive regard, statements that express empathy, acceptance for the person you're working with, and then what I would call compassionate curiosity, which is a genuine interest in learning about and helping the young person that you're working with. The technical component, which we'll get to later in the lecture, is characterized by differential reinforcement and evocation of change talk, which is a mouthful, but I'll hopefully describe a little bit about what that looks like later. How motivational interviewing looks is a process where you start with engaging, and this is where you create a connection. We're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about some of the key skills that a person that's interested in using motivational interviewing would use to engage. But you can imagine this is about expressing empathy, being compassionate and curious, being accepting and affirming. And then these other parts are really, they build on this engaging component. So you don't stop engaging when you start focusing and evoking. But once you've engaged and you've created this connection, this technical component becomes more important in evoking change talk and reinforcing change talk and thinking about how you could help the person that you're working with make the changes that they're interested in making. So why do we engage this? Why don't we just jump into the technical component? what we know from the best available research evidence is that when you engage relationally, when you approach people from this very accepting and empathic approach to conversations, people will be more open to talking about what they're thinking about doing. Both change talk, which are statements that favor change, and then also sustained talk, which are statements that favor no change. So people feel more comfortable when you engage them well. And what will happen is that people will say, hey, I'm thinking about this. I'm not sure if I want to do it. This would be the benefits of changing. And, this is why I don't really want to change right now. And if you record conversations with people, you can actually measure how much change talk and sustained talk they use in the conversation. And what we know, there's a recent meta-analysis by Molly McGill at Brown University, is that it looks like the proportion of change talk to sustained talk, when a conversation favors more change talk, people are more likely to change at the end of the conversation. So we engage so that we can use these technical skills to really evoke and reinforce people's reasons that they would like to change. So the purpose of the technical component is to differentially evoke, which means to call forth or bring out of a person. It doesn't mean teach or impute or instruct. It means to ask them, what their reasons are, and then to reinforce change talk such that the proportion of this conversation leans towards change talk. So let's take a look at how we might do some of this stuff. So in engaging is the process where the client or the young person that you're working with and the helper create a connection. And this connection should be based on mutuality, trust, empathy. When you have a strong, engaged relationship, there's shared agreement on the goals of why you're in the relationship with the person. And there's collaboration. It's almost like you can imagine, looking at a photo album together with a young person, asking them questions about what's going on in the different pictures. It's collaboration on mutually negotiated tasks to reach goals that are important to the young person you're working with. So some questions that I operate a mentoring program that uses motivational interviewing, and something that we tell our mentors to ask themselves before they have change-oriented conversations with the young person they're working with. So imagine, we tell them to put yourself in the young person that you're working with shoes and ask these questions about yourself. Do I feel respected by my mentor? Does my mentor understand me? Do I have a voice in the direction of our meetings and conversation? Do I have a say in what we do when we meet together? And am I hopeful after meeting with him or her? And if your answer to any of these questions are no, then I would spend more time engaging before you jump into conversations about behavior change. I find these to be helpful, even in brief conversations, perhaps, a crisis situation where students coming in, ask yourself these questions. It might be important to actually build that respect and understanding and get their voice in the direction of the conversation and instilling hope before you jump into solutions or that writing reflex that we're talking about. So how we do this in motivational interviewing is by using the OARS. OARS is an acronym for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, or summaries. We've probably all had experience with these, even if we've called them something different. For example, reflective listening is sometimes referred to as accurate expressions of empathy or active listening. Open-ended questions can be, we'll go through each of these, but open-ended questions have been called other things as well. So some examples of open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are questions that it feels awkward to answer with one word. So you could technically ask an open-ended question like, how was your day? But it's pretty easy to answer with one word. And more often than not, especially when you're working with young people, and especially if they're shy, they're probably only going to answer with one word, and you're not really going to learn much about them. But a really great open-ended question is one that you ask that can't be answered easily, or it feels awkward to answer with one word. So questions that fit this ticket are things like, what matters most to you right now? How would you like your life to be different next semester? What are the rules that you live by? Or it could be, some imperative statements that act like questions, like, tell me about your day. Or something I do with my kids is highs and lows. Tell me your high and low today. What was the best part of your day and what was the worst part of your day? These are questions where you get to learn about what's going on in the kid's head and, what they're thinking about and feeling about. And you can use these throughout the phases of motivational interviewing. Affirmations are these are statements that accentuate the positive about the young person that you work with, that communicate appreciation. It could be as simple as, I'm really glad you're here today. Or you can imagine if a student is, really trying hard on a goal that they're working on, but they just can't quite get it. An affirmation might be something like, your intention was good, even though it didn't turn out as you would have liked. Or imagine a student that says something that you might not be too thrilled that they just said. It's something that they did or something that you don't necessarily approve of. It could be something like, I appreciate how honest you're being with me. Or, you can affirm other statements. If they're making comments about their family, you could say, man, you really must care about your family the way that you talk about them. So one way to help providers, like especially our mentors who have limited formal training in motivational interviewing, is to use activities to help facilitate the use of open-ended questions, affirmations, and reflections. One of the activities that's common in motivational interviewing is something called a value card sort. A value card sort is where you get a deck of cards that have values printed on them. One that we use in our program, some examples are things like making my parents proud, being responsible, being respected by my teachers, creative, or making others laugh. We have about 60 values in our value card sort. And mentors will ask the young people that they're working with to rank these values in 3 columns. One is very important to me, or not important to me. And we only allow them to have 5 very important. So these have to be the really highly prioritized values. And a good way to engage using this activity is to ask questions, open-ended questions, and to make affirmations and reflections after the mentees rate and talk about these. So you can imagine a mentee that rates their highest value as making my parents proud. You could ask them questions like, what does it feel like when you make your parents proud? How do you know when your parents are proud of what you do? How do you see that, or how do they tell you? What are some things that you do at school that make your parents proud? What are some things that you plan to do today to make your parents proud? These are all examples of open-ended questions where you can learn more about the young person that you're working with. And you can make affirmations as you go through this, but you can also spend this time reflecting, which is what we're getting to next. So far we've gotten through the O in OARS, which is open-ended questions, the A, which is affirmations, and now we're getting into reflections or reflective listening. And we're making good time today. So reflections are where you take a guess at what the person means. And these are given in the form of a statement, not a question. So one distinction that we make is you could have the same syntax. For example, let's imagine a question/statement that's, you're feeling uncomfortable. You've noticed that something in the conversation has made the young person you're working with uncomfortable. You could ask that the syntax for that statement in a question, or you can make it into a statement. And the semantics of that statement are different. So for example, if you say you're feeling uncomfortable right now, where your intonation goes up at the end, you're expressing, I don't know, I'm asking you, or I'm challenging you, or I don't trust you, or I'm confused why you'd feel that way. Whereas a statement is where you say, you're feeling uncomfortable right now. And it communicates, I'm with you, I understand. We're on the same page. In motivational interviewing, helpers typically have 2 to 3 reflections for every open-ended question that they ask. Oftentimes, when you are in a helping conversation, especially if you speak quickly or feel uncomfortable with silence, you'll have this tendency to ask too many questions. And there is such a thing as too many open-ended questions. Some young people that I've worked with have described that type of feeling when their mentors or counselors talk to them that way, is it feels like an interrogation, like they've done something wrong and someone's trying to catch them. In motivational interviewing, we want to be more expressing our empathy towards the person that we're working with rather than questioning them without giving them feedback that we're on the same page. One way I talk about reflections is it's like saying, I understand what you're going through, or I get you, without ever saying that. No one really wants to hear somebody say that, but it's more of a show, don't tell. Show them that you understand by reflecting what they've said back to them. Let's do a couple examples of these. You can imagine the helper, the mentor, is doing a report card review. A report card review is something we do in our program. After the kids get the report cards, they have a mentor that sits down with them, and they look through the report card with the mentee's permission. And let's imagine that, one of the kids is not doing well in science. And the mentor asks a really nice open-ended question. What would you like to do with your science grades? And imagine the student says something like, I don't know. I think my teacher hates me. It doesn't matter what I do. I always fail. It's like I try everything and never pass. A reflection for this, you can imagine being the helper, sit back and think, what is it like to be in this kid's shoe right now? Perhaps our writing reflex is to say, look, your teacher doesn't really hate you. You just got to study more. Science is hard. You need to get your note cards out, and so on and so forth. You jump right into that expert advice giving or dismissing or commanding your student. But the approach for motivational interviewing is to sit there and take the student where they are and to carefully listen to what they're saying. Maybe a reasonable reflection for this statement the student said is that, you're worried that your teacher is not grading you fairly, and you're not quite sure what to do. Which one captures that sense of, the kid doesn't see things as fair right now, and they're frustrated, but they don't really have a solution yet for how they're going to approach this. Let's take a look at another one. This is actually from a tape that we used in one of our mentoring programs, just with a kid that was struggling with some aggression that they had. And the kid said something to the extent of, sometimes I lose control. And when that happens, there isn't much I can do but fight. It's like I black out. It's like I could do anything and not feel bad. My first reaction to this type of statement is one that's pretty insightful for a kid that perhaps is struggling with some aggression problems, to reflect on his behavior this way. And maybe a reasonable reflection in this situation is, there's this special type of frustration that you feel, and you're worried that you might do something you regret the next time you feel that way. And I think that's a reasonable reflection, because in the statement this kid's made, he says this thing, it's like I could do anything and not feel bad, as if he could and should feel bad if he were more sober-minded when he made this decision. So this idea that there's something special about this frustration the kid's experiencing, and he's worried that he might do something bad the next time. I think it's a great example of a reflection or a paraphrase. The summaries are kind of like reflections, but they're used to tie things together. Summaries are typically a bit longer when you make them, and they're often used to collect information that was previously said, perhaps even from a previous session. You can say, I remember you talking about that last week. I'd like to, review some of that, what you said, and how it relates to what you've just said. It can also be a way to tie information together from the current conversation to make sense of a conversation. If you work with young people a lot, sometimes these conversations can get away from you, and you might not have a good sense of, how to make sense of the conversation. One of the reasons that I love summaries is it's great. It's a great opportunity to ask what else questions, where you make a summary, you make sense of what how this conversation is going, and you can say, what else? Tell me what else is going on with that. Or I often use did I miss anything, or what did I miss? Did I miss anything is technically a closed-ended question, so that probably shouldn't be on the slide, but you could say, what did I miss? And this is a way to, again, reflect with the student. I'm with you. I'm hearing you. What you're saying is important. I want to, make sure that I capture it, that I'm really listening to you. So we've gone through the OARS, which are part of the engaging component. And now I want to transition a little bit into this, which the engaging component, again, is this relational component. We know that one of the reasons motivational interviewing works is this relational component, the use of open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. And the other reason that motivational interviewing works to help behavior change is this focusing and evoking, or the technical component of motivational interviewing, which we're going to take a brief dive into as well. So change talk is a person's own statements that favor change. So really important here is these are reasons for change that the young person you're working with has voiced, not that you've given them or taught them or told them that they should have. It's not you imputing your values on them. It's them telling you and you asking about the reasons that they might want to change. So again, we know that motivational interviewing works because the young person you're working with feels understood and accepted. And the second part of that is the person being helped makes more statements that favor change than statements that don't favor change. So they favor that change talk over the sustained talk. And the good news is that by being strategic in your conversations, you can increase the likelihood that people will think about and discuss change talk more than sustained talk. So encouraging change talk. One of the acronyms that we help our mentors remember is DARN, which stands for Common Dimensions of Change Talk of desire, ability, reasons, or need. A desire is some type of preference or wish or want that the young person might have. One of the common desires is dissatisfaction with the status quo. Things aren't going well right now. And I think it would be nice if things could change a little bit. Asking questions like, what would make things just a little bit better for you this semester? Ability. This could be something like I'm able to, I can, I could, it would be possible to do things. Reasons. These could be specific arguments that they may have for change. Why would they be interested in doing it? Why would it be good? And so on. And then need is some type of externally imposed factor that's going to make them have to change. Like they're going to, something that's going to, it's necessary that they change because something's going to happen if they don't. One of the skills of learning motivational interviewing is being very attuned to these dimensions of change talk, what they are, how they look in conversations, how to ask for them, and how to respond to them. How we do this is through evoking. So evoking is the process of getting the young person that you're working with to vocalize their own reasons for changing and how they might go about doing it. And this is an approach to thinking about and talking about their own ambivalence in a way that favors change towards positive outcomes, something that would reduce their suffering, improve their well-being or life. So how do you get somebody to talk about change talk? The easiest way is just to ask someone questions about change. You can imagine asking a young person you're working with, in what ways would it be good for you to stop fighting at school? If you decided to start studying more, how would you do it? How would that look? What would be some good things about, cutting back on the amount that you drink right now? Why would you want to cut back on the amount that you're drinking right now? What are some good things about staying in school and what are some not so good things about staying in school? Each of these are open-ended questions that are designed to elicit change talk. And this is, the cornerstone of this idea of evoking are strategic questions that allow people the conversational environment to think about reasons that they might want to change. Another common tool that's used in motivational interviewing are arbitrary rulers. For example, importance and confidence rulers. So confidence rulers are these are common questions that we use just in everyday vernacular. Is on a scale from 0 to 10, how important is it for you, let's say, to improve your science grade? Let's imagine you're a mentor talking with a young person who's not doing very well in science right now. And let's imagine this young person says, I'm at a 4 right now, 4 out of 10, with 0 being it's totally not important to me and 10 being it's the most important thing right now. And let's say they say a 4. Our writing reflex, when we hear that, immediately jumps into, or at least I do, I want to say, why are you only at a 4? Like you're going to get held back and you're going to have to, repeat with kids that you don't know, and your GPA is going to go down and it's going to hurt your opportunity for, getting a scholarship or going to college. Why isn't it more important to you? But again, that's our writing reflex, and that's going to evoke that sustained talk and defensiveness, and it's going to hurt our relationship. But imagine how different the tenor of that conversation sounds if you ask, why are you at a 4 and not a 0? What makes it that much important to you? Why is it important to you at all? And then what happens when you ask that question is that the answer is favoring change talk rather than sustained talk. So instead of them saying, you can imagine from the first approach that I said, why aren't you higher? And probably what a kid would say is, I don't care. I don't care about science. I don't care about school. I don't do anything. I don't want to be here. I don't like these people. But if you ask, why are you at a 4 instead of a 0? The antecedent for that conversation is, well, I would like to stay with my group and I don't want to get held back. And, having an opportunity for college one day would actually be kind of cool for me. You can use the same approach with confidence to get a sense of where the kid's at with their self-efficacy related to something. So you can imagine talking to a kid, about avoiding fighting in the hallways. This might be a kid that's had, rough time at school and is really struggling. And, you ask them like, I'm just curious on a scale from 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, 0 being you're 100% positive that you could not do it, and 10 being that you're absolutely certain you could do it. How confident are you that you could avoid a fight between your science and math periods when you're walking through the halls? And let's imagine the kid says something like a 5. Again, our writing reflex goes into want to say, no, you're not at a 5. You could do better than that. You're better than that. You don't need to fight. You don't have to go in there and, mess around and get expelled or suspended or anything like that. Trying to argue with the kid or not take the kid where they're at or belittling them in some way, shooting them or moralizing. But from the approach of motivational interviewing, you could ask, why are you at a 5 instead of a 0? What makes you that confident that you could avoid fighting in the hallway? Why are you at a 5 instead of like a 2 or a 3? What makes it just that little bit more? And by asking that question, you're asking them to reflect on an aspect of change talk called ability talk. I could do this. I've got some strategies, that I could use, or it's happened in the past. You don't know what you'll hear until you ask that. And this is also, these things seem arbitrary, and perhaps they could be overused. But one of the great features of using these arbitrary scales is that you can ask other questions. Like, imagine this kid says 5 on confidence. A great open-ended question to follow up with that is, how could we spend our time together? What would it take to, move the needle from a 5 to a 6? What would make you just a little bit more confident that you could avoid fighting the next time you go out in the halls together? And by using these open-ended questions, you can compound this change talk to really, start evoking from the kid, like, how would this look? Why is this important to me? Why would I want to do this? Why do I perhaps need to do this? So some examples again of change talk is, if you decided to stop fighting, how would you do it? What are the good things about staying in school instead of dropping out? And what are the not so good things? So you can use these open-ended questions to really explore ambivalence. So this second question would elicit both change and sustained talk. You can imagine a kid says, I'm just really frustrated with school right now. I just feel like I got to get out of here. And at the same time, I'd really like to go to college, and I don't know how I'd see most of my friends without being at school. And you can make a reflection that says, school's not working out. And at the same time, you've got hopes and you've also got a lot of friends that you'd leave behind if you left. And you could reflect that to them. And then you could ask them a follow-up open-ended question. Why are your friends so important to you? What makes them important to you? Why would they be a reason that you'd want to stay? And again, the answer to those questions are change talk. All right. Let's see. So there's also, we've added to our acronym DARNs to include cats. So now it's technically darn cats, but cats are additional types of change talk that are focused on action. So these are commitment-focused speech. These are, promises or oaths. I'm going to do this. I promise I'll do this. I'll never do it again. That can be something that you can capture in a reflection and query more about. Actuation could be something that they plan to do. Like you can imagine a young person saying, I'm having a bad week this week, but next week I'm going to get it together. Next week I'm going to try something new, or maybe next week we can meet together. Or it could be something where they've already started taking steps. Perhaps they're not there with behavior change yet, but they're getting in the gear to start. So this could be something like, this past week I started taking a different route in school to avoid that kid that's been agitating me. Or this week, I started to sit next to someone that I enjoy at the lunch table so I don't feel so dismal, during the lunch period. So what happens after you've evoked all this change talk and there seems to be some momentum for change? The young person you're working with feels like they might be interested in change and they've expressed some reasons or ability or desire to change. This is where the planning phase of motivational interviewing comes in. And another way to refer to this planning phase is partnering for change. And what I mean by this is, sometimes you work with kids and you start having these conversations about change, and that's all it takes. Like the kid might leave your office that day and start making changes in their lives and start doing things differently just from reflecting on why they might want to do that with you. I mean, this is some of the big randomized controlled trials of motivational interviewing are like single session interventions where it's one meeting with someone that gives them the space to talk and think about reasons that they might want to change. And other times it might be like in our program, a prolonged mentoring relationship where they meet, with their kids several times. But there will be times when you're working with young people and they know they want to change. They've expressed this to you using the darn cats, and they've, in your discussion, you've talked through reasons they might want to change, but they don't know how to achieve the outcome that they want. One of my cautions with this is that you should not overestimate the amount of times that the young person you're working with doesn't know how to figure out their own problems. There will be these times, but I would caution not overestimating them. When it does happen, though, where the young person you're working with doesn't know how to achieve the outcome that they want, you can partner with them. And what I mean by partnering is that you help them come up with their own solution. So how does this look? One of the ways to do this is to ask permission to disclose information. So this is not asking permission to give advice. It's asking permission to disclose information in an objective way that allows the student or the young person that you're working with to make sense of it. So one of the things we instruct our mentors to do if a kid's struggling with something and we've got a really nice evidence-based practice, for example, we use the HOPS curriculum, which is Homework Organization and Planning Strategies curriculum for things like disorganization or symptoms related to ADHD in the classroom. You might say something like, we've worked with several students that had very similar concerns to what you're expressing to me right now in the past. And, some of them found some things very helpful and then other things not really helpful at all. I'm curious, would you be interested in looking over what others found helpful? And perhaps maybe you'd find something that might be helpful for you. And this approach to asking permission to partner is one that says, look, this is up to you. I might have some information that you might find helpful, but I don't want to look at it unless you want to look at it. And in fact, one of the things that we recognize and we emphasize in partnering is this idea of reinforcing autonomy, asking permission to disclose information. You may say something like, ultimately, this decision of, if to change and what to change and how to change is up to you. You have a really good idea of what you can do. You have a really good idea of the outcome that you would like. I'm happy to help you get there, but that decision really is going to be up to you. So it's the purpose of this motivational interviewing approach and the kind of spirit that we're discussing in this is to avoid that righting reflex. Rather than fixing a problem for someone, encouraging them and supporting them and listening to them in a way that allows them to find out their own solution to fix their own problems that they have going on. In terms of, I want to have time for Q&A. We're getting close to the end of the hour for this. And this was essentially a crash course in what's the flavor of motivational interviewing? What does it look like? What does it sound like? How's it perhaps similar to some of the things that you're already doing or different from some of the things that you already do? But if you are interested and if you'd actually like to pick up some skills in motivational interviewing, I'd encourage you to get the text, the Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick text. It's really well written. It's got a broad range of, clients that are examples in the text, and it really goes through in detail to the spirit of motivational interviewing. Another opportunity is to look for specific training in motivational interviewing. So there's this motivational interviewing network of trainers. If you go to motivationalinterviewing.org, they have many trainers that are skilled in training other people in motivational interviewing and are often available for organizations. But perhaps my biggest suggestion after you've gotten the text, you've had an opportunity to learn more about it, is to get a practice partner. So I struggled for a long time to learn motivational interviewing until I found someone that I could actually practice with, to record myself and get feedback for how well I was doing. And that's, I think, the single best way to learn, is to have someone that you can practice this with. It often feels like it's a performance or a performance sport, motivational interviewing. And it does require practice and performance feedback, and perhaps some coaching as well. So now I'd like to open it up for questions or thoughts or reactions to the crowd. I've also posted my contact information up here. And I think that, let's see, did we get all our chat box should be open now. So if there are any questions, feel free to reach out. And if you have to get out of here, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or email as well. So Danielle, do we have the chat box, the questions open for the attendees?
Yeah, it should be open. Somebody could just type in something. Just say hi. Let us know. Oh, perfect. We did have somebody.
I can send you copies of the slides. So thank you for asking that. If you'd like copies of the slides, feel free to shoot me an email, or Danielle an email, whoever you got the contact from. Thank you, Natasha. All righty, I'm going to hang out for a couple more minutes, but you're free to go if you don't have questions. And you're also free to sit around and listen to other people's questions if you have them as well. Thank you guys for attending. Thank you, Tamika. Thank you, Kimberly. So this is a great question for Rick. How do you get back on track when you're trying to actively use MI techniques and the person you're not working with is engaging? Yeah, I think it's a great question. And, like the caveat at the beginning of the lecture is that, motivational interviewing isn't a cure-all. So it's not a panacea that's going to help every kid you're working with. In my experience, though, you're much more likely to engage and get through to the kid when you're approaching the conversations about change and conversations in general that are characterized by that empathy, the acceptance, and the compassionate curiosity. The sad truth is that some kids won't change their behavior, but we should have hope that they can. And we should, try to align our approach to conversation with practices that we know are more likely to help than to harm. But I've had students. I had a student at the University of Houston that was really clever. Had a young person they were working with, had a really hard time engaging with them. Kid didn't really want to talk. Wasn't doing much. Had a really bad relationship with previous counselors and so on. And so what my student did is that they really just focused on kind of activities that they would do, even contrived activities. I remember one time she told me she, moved all the tables in her room, like in the counseling room, and had the chairs and cabinets put around. And, when he came in that day, she just said, look, we don't have to talk about what's going on today. I'm just looking for help to rearrange my office. And they just sat around and moved desks and tables around. And other times they'd walk around the football field and not talk, but just, shoulder to shoulder type of thing. But eventually, after that kid developed some trust with her, he came through and was willing to talk about some of the pretty serious stuff that was going on in his life. And the other thing too is we don't have it all figured out. There's still a lot of questions in motivational interviewing. So there's probably other strategies and techniques that might work as well. Yes, Beth, it looks like it falls into the category of coaching. Thank you, Sherry. In South Carolina, George, thanks for asking this. We do a lot of trainings with my lab. And we often have these available to people that are interested in doing it. If you're interested in that, shoot me an email and we can tell you next time we're going to have one. So Lee Porter asks, are you familiar with organizational applications of motivational interviewing when we may be working with other community-based organizations such as Coaching to Fidelity? Yes, there's some great organizational and group level applications. So one that comes to mind is there's a curriculum called the Classroom Checkup, which isn't necessarily organizational, but it's an approach to having conversations with teachers about classroom management that involves taking a look at the whole class and getting a sense of how the class is functioning and perhaps some things that might be changed. I've also noticed that there's some, if you look into the empowerment evaluation literature, empowerment evaluation uses a lot of the similar strategies to understanding the problem and building motivation and capacity for organizations to change. I'm happy to share some literature on empowerment evaluation if you shoot me an email as well. Thank you, Beverly. No, I share that. I love that statement you made. How can you help me help you move forward? Thanks, Lee. We've got about 5-6 more minutes left, so feel free to ask other questions if you guys have them. I'll be hanging out to the end of the hour. It should be up on the screen. Let's see, George. If you can't see it on the screen, I'll type it in the chat. I do it in all caps because people get confused with the I's and the L's. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, George. And I completely agree, Rick. I think that trust is especially important working with young people, especially adolescent age. All righty. So Daniel, I think we've had I think people are finished asking questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share.
All right, I'll go ahead and shut it down. Oh, it looks like we have one more comment before I cut it off.
Right. No, Rick, I totally agree. I think that trust thing is important. And I think, one of the things I mentioned earlier is there seems to be some basic nudges that you can, remind yourself of that help you get in that position to think about trust, of asking yourself, like, if I'm this person, do I have good reason to trust this therapist or this counselor, or this mentor that I'm working with? And I think if you ask yourself that question, it makes you think, like, what have I done to build trust? Or, what reasons would this person have to trust me? I think it can be challenging. So I totally agree. And I don't think it's often addressed very well by clinicians or educators and others.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. If anybody wants to reach out, you have Dr. McQuillin's email, or you can contact me as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.